Hi. So I'm here in the Kimberley in Australia with one of Australia's leading dietitians, Joanna McMillan, and she actually did her research in the glycemic index, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of fiber as it relates to the glycemic index. So thank you.
Hi Ashley, nice to have you here.
Absolutely. So you actually studied this for your PhD, yes, the
I
glycemic
did.
index.
Yeah, my PhD was looking at the impact of the glycemic index principally on weight loss and on body composition change. So we know that it's not just important how much weight you lose, but how much of it is muscle and how much of it is fat. And then we looked at a number of cardiovascular risk factors and how low GI and high GI affected those factors.
And was there anything that you found out that was surprising to you in that research in terms of, we hear a lot about high protein diets or about low carb diets. How does the glycemic index factor into that?
Well, that was one of the things that I looked at. I looked at 4 different diets and compared their efficiency in losing weight, and 2 of them were high protein with reduced carbs, so they weren't very low carb diets, and 2 of them were higher carbohydrates. And we tried to keep fat the same across the board. And then we looked at how was the GI influencing that across the board. What was really interesting was, and I have to add that my high protein diets were relatively high meat, although the high protein and low GI diets both equally managed to have better body fat loss than the sort of traditional high carb, low fat approach. What was different was the effect on cholesterol, and low GI was very effective at reducing cholesterol, whereas that same effect did not happen in the higher protein groups. In fact, their cholesterol went up.
Oh, interesting. So if somebody's hearing this at home and they're thinking, okay, I want weight loss and I can do it either with a high protein diet or the low carb, but I want to follow this GI, the glycemic index, what are some of the foods or what are some of the exchanges you could recommend?
Well, I think first up to say is what's really nice and great news, I think, to most people who enjoy some carb foods is that, we can't put all carbs in one basket. That's what the GI teaches us, that there's good carbs and there's not so good carbs. And definitely, if you direct yourself towards having low GI carbs, add to that a little bit of extra protein. We do know that some protein is helpful for weight loss. Then you get a double whammy. So the kinds of foods that we're looking at are the minimally processed foods. I find it interesting if we look through history that in fact, we didn't start getting fat until the last 50 years and we've eaten carbs for thousands of years.
Right.
So it's really what we're doing to carbohydrates these days. And the glycemic index is just science catching up and understanding why it is that whole grains and minimally processed carbs are much better for us than those modern carbs. So the kind of foods we're looking at, well, we've got things like quinoa and barley that we tend to have forgotten about. If you get a whole grain bread where you can see the grains are fairly intact in the bread, that's much, much better. You're looking for whole grain, minimally processed type breakfast cereals rather than the breakfast cereals that are processed, that may be high fiber, but they're still made from processed flours. Those are the kinds of foods that we're looking at.
Great, and we've been here, we got to see the chia in full flower and some of it harvested. Are you seeing the introduction of chia here in Australia to make a difference in terms of glycemic index and the fiber content of foods?
Well, we are. We haven't done any specific GI studies with chia. Chia itself doesn't have a big carbohydrate content, so it won't itself have a GI. But what I'll be interested in looking at is because when you put chia into water and you see that gel that forms because of the soluble fiber on the outside of the chia grain, that's the same sort of gelatinous gel that's formed with soluble fiber and other foods that we know lowers the glycemic index. And the reason for that is that gel being formed in your gut slows down the digestive enzymes, breaking down the carbohydrate bonds that are in the foods that you eat. So one of the things that we'd like to look at is if we add chia into a bread or we add chia into a breakfast cereal or into a drink, does that lower the GI of the overall end food product? And that will be something that we'll be looking at here in Australia.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.